Correcting average RMS. If you produce audiobooks, what do you do if your finished file doesn't pass the requirement for average RMS? Find out in this edition of Stuart's Audacity Tips. Did you know members of the VO community are among the most supportive of each other, professionally speaking? Thinking of it, you probably did know that. Keep up the tradition. Send this tip to someone else. In the audiobook world, one of the technical specs your finished work must pass is a minimum average RMS target, usually minus 23 dB. I recently had a question from a relatively new narrator-producer who had always had all their project files pass the average RMS test until their most recent project. Because of that, when a file failed to pass the test, they didn't know how to fix it. So let's do. Remember that average RMS is measured in negative dB. So if it fails a minus 23 dB threshold test, the average RMS will be a bigger negative number, for example minus 23.8. That means that on average, the file isn't loud enough. What can cause this? The culprit is usually a few spikes in amplitude. Even one word that stands out too much can cause the average amplitude to be too low when the audio is normalized. This is because the overly high peaks cause the rest of the waveform to fall below the minus 23 dB threshold on average. Here's a simplified sample that shows a distinct peak at the start. The waveform has been normalized to minus 3 dB. When we check the average RMS, it shows as minus 23.29 dB. But if we select the words or phrases that contain the peaks and decrease their amplitude by 3 dB, and then normalize to minus 3 dB again, then the average RMS is minus 21.59. Notice how the waveform in the second screenshot is a little fatter than the waveform in the first. Reducing that peak has allowed the normalization process to bring the rest of the waveform into proper specs. In practice, I'd probably bring the amplitude of the first word down a little closer to the next word, in which case the finished average RMS would be even more comfortably within specs. But avoid the urge to overly squash peaks. It is possible to blow out the other side of ACX Check's average RMS requirement at minus 18 dB. One other thing, always measure average RMS across an entire chapter file and only test your finalized, edited and mastered files for average RMS. If you test any earlier in the process or only test part of the chapter, you'll be chasing inaccurate test results and just wasting your own time. I don't want you to do that. Hope this helps. I'm Stuart.